Hello and welcome to Property Matters, a weekly look at all matters property designed to be of interest to anyone who has an interest in property. And Property Matters is supported by Fairview International Property Consultancy and auctionproperty.co.uk. Each week we're focusing on those big stories in the news that involve property, and we'd love your thoughts in the comments section below where you're watching us today, wherever that might be, on Facebook or YouTube. And of course, don't forget to like the page where you're watching us and subscribe so you get those notifications of when we're live. You can also email us, propertymatterstv@gmail.com. Joining us as always is our property expert, Joe Joshi. Hi, Joe.
Expert as well, huh? Yes, hello. Hello and welcome everybody. Good to have you all join us. Always Property Matters got plenty in store going on, and of course as the times change, so do all matters property, and I'm sure we'll try and keep you up to date of all the changes that are coming along as they happen.
Yes, it's been a busy week for the money side of things, the financial side of things, if you like. Obviously, we had an increase in the base rate during the week to 0.75%, 0.75. And it's for the first time in a number of years, in fact, in recent years, and cost of living is, of course, going up faster than the price of houses. Of course, so this is effectively a situation where obviously inflation is going up faster than the value of your home, so therefore you're kind of losing value on your home, which of course is something we've never talked about, certainly on Property Matters, and you don't often see happen in the marketplace.
I don't think I could agree with the fact that we're losing value on our homes. I think what we have to say is there is a correction that will happen, and it was inevitable. Having had the changes that have been happening in the pandemic over the last couple of years, and the way the property market has been driven, the way the building industry has been driven, and the things that people have been able to do have made the changes in the value of their home and of course in the property. We've always discussed, and I've always been quite vocal about the fact that the government will always use the property industry, the property market, as its gauge as to when they want to accelerate it and when they want to put the brakes on it and slow it down. And right now we're on the slow down brake section, because obviously it has been accelerated quite nicely over the last few years. It's given them income when they've been spending out left, right and center in terms of the pandemic and the things that we've had to do in order to deal with COVID-19. And of course now it is time for them to start to sort of cash in and bring some money in. And so there will be increases that either been promised or are just going to be put upon us, because they know that that's where they can get their best money from. So do not ever be put off the idea of property. To all our viewers and listeners, property is still the safest bet. It's just that how you use it, how you make it work. And obviously the same vein, it's how the government tend to use it as well. And you'll see that as we go along and discuss. So whilst it's saying, inflation is going to be higher than the value of property, the fact is that it's got a hell of a long way to catch up. But it needs to sort of put a brake on it, because it doesn't give a chance to first-time buyers, to new people coming into the marketplace, to sort of step onto the first run of the property ladder. Well, I think that it's not actually a bad thing to actually see that there's a little bit of a break going on. It allows people to catch up. It allows things to sort of fall into a bit of a balance, and it gives chance in the other sector of the property. So it's good for the property buyers, but there are property investors, there are property money savers that have money sitting in their bank, and it gives all of those a chance to sort of maybe have a slight reprieve on their investments.
Yeah, so just to put some numbers on this, Joe, the inflation is predicted to peak at just over 7%, may even be as high as 8% by the latter part of the year. Certainly by the time we get to the second peak in October, when Ofgem's energy price cap will rise again. So let's just say it peaks at 8%. We were expecting to see house prices 4 to 6% this year. Reality is suggesting that nationally that's going to be around 2 to 3% this year. Up until January, I think things were, from memory, Gráinne Gilmore was saying this week that prices were around 7 to 8% this up until January, which was interesting because that was a broad mix of property price success or not, as the case may be, because London was falling by about -2%, whereas places like Wales, for example, were up 16%. So that median in the middle of sort of 7 or 8% also had areas like such as London, which was below zero, so in other words, shrinking, but also as far high up as 16% for Wales. So that's a very different marketplace just 3 months later, isn't it?
Yes, because again, it's the focus goes on where people are and what people are doing for work. Don't forget, over the last few years, we've had a complete change of the way we work, live, and sort of have our lives. And then there is a kind of resurge back into what we could think is the new norm, but people are coming back into the city. People are actually renting more properties. There is a shorter supply of properties that are rented, and of course, then there is the demand for people sort of back to work, and some of them are actually quite looking forward to it because it means that they get some sort of normality in their life as well, which is quite important to have. And all of those things are affecting how people, are investing and purchasing property. But unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you look at it, I think it's fortunate for people like me who are in the property industry that, it is the only safest form of investment ever made, as far as I'm concerned, without any of the caveats and all the sort of protective words and saying that, we're not protected to say this, that, the other, and we're not in the financial services. It is bricks and mortar. It's been proven for, certainly in my lifetime, for over 40 years, that it's been a good investment. I can't see that changing. It will have a certain time of breaks that will put on it, and people will readjust and so forth, depending on what the government wants them to do. Obviously, there are many factors that are going to be involved in this, Paul. And as you know, and we've known, and I think we put it out on recent medium, that everybody should, I think I covered it last week, everybody should by the 31st, or if not prior to the 31st, make sure that you've done your meter readings, for example, because prices are going to go absolutely astronomically high. Things that you cannot actually plan for or have budgeted for in the utilities, in your gas and your electric and so forth, because they've got the chance to whack a huge difference. I remember you mentioning, I think it was about £700 a year difference for what you used to pay to what you're going to be paying. And it's very, very important to make sure that you take the meter readings prior to the 31st of March, or take a picture or record or whatever you've got to do, because you don't want them to be actually charging you at the higher rate, at the lesser usage perhaps in the last year. So those things are going to actually affect the pockets a lot. Interest rates are obviously now at 0.75%. We kind of always knew that will probably go somewhere like that as time went on. It's still cheap by comparison to where we've all had experiences from, but it is a caution for one to sort of look at, and I think ultimately that will probably settle at 3 or 4%. And you've got to budget for that, and say to you that the likelihood is that interest rates are probably going to be back at 3 or 4%, possibly even up to 5% as time goes on. Ukraine and the war obviously is beginning to bite, in the retail sector, and even if it wasn't biting, the retailers are utilizing this window of opportunity to whack up prices and tell you that there is a problem with supply and demand, hence pushing up prices. So all of those factors are factors that are going to actually change the influence of inflation, but they're factors that you and I as ordinary people are not actually in charge of keeping an eye on. They are done by people that are in that particular business, and unfortunately food is necessary, so food prices are going to go up. Petrol prices, economy wise, is just absolutely ludicrous now. It's the highest ever that I think we've ever seen it, certainly in my time. Now I reckon we're going to be over, in some places already over £2, and I think we're going to be going over £2. And that's not just this government's fault, but consecutive government's fault by sticking to, one supplier, and now running around with a begging bowl saying maybe somebody else could do us a deal. Anyone that is in power should understand the art of negotiation is that, you've got somewhere else to fall to. But if you've actually put all your eggs in one basket, then Putin is definitely going to be holding that basket, and when it falls, you're going to crack. And that's where we are right now. So I think, a lot of people that are in the chair sometimes don't look at the bigger picture because it's only about what's currently available to them at the time. But those are the things that I think that are going to actually influence the desire to move for the short term. But that doesn't take away for the fact that the only thing that gives them the comfort, the confidence, and the reliability of something that is actually going to be good for them. This is still the place that everybody wants to buy. This is still the place that bricks and mortar makes value. And yes, it might slow it down for a while, but it will go back again. So we're going to go into neutral. As I describe it, we have drive, neutral, and reverse. We very rarely go into reverse. We are now going into neutral. We've done drive for a while, and we'll be in neutral, and then we'll push forward again. Look over your shoulder, look in the mirror, and off we go.
Mirror signal maneuver.
You know it.
It's about the only thing I do remember from my highway code. Actually, it's interesting you mentioned that, because just pick you up on a point there, Joe. I was just thinking whether the government will be now reviewing their decision to get all of the Chinese companies to make the nuclear power stations for Britain. That's going to be an interesting one. But when those decisions were made, as indeed when the Germans decided to get the Russians to help them build another pipeline, it was a different world order to what we now have. So it'd be very interesting to see how all that goes up. But this is a property show; it's not a politics show. So let's get back to the story. And of course, there is an impact here as well for people who are renting, because landlords are businesses at the end of the day. They're going to see the increased costs. They're going to go and put their rent up to make sure they keep their margins maintained, because they're going to have these increased costs, and they want to reflect the increased capital value of their property as well.
It's supply and demand, isn't it, Paul? At the end of the day, it's the bottom and the top of the commerce world, supply and demand. A demand for property to rent is going to be increased as the demand for property available to rent decreases, primarily because if such punishments are being put on the table by governments to say that they're going to tax them and they're going to do this and they're going to do that, obviously there's going to be lesser people wanting to buy those property at this moment in time. But the ones that are available will have to charge higher rents to counter the expenses that are going to go on. So it's, back to the faith, like I just said, it's all of the things that we've been sitting and enjoying at a certain level, we're now not going to enjoy for a short time. They're going to be paid. There's no such thing as a free lunch. And so we've got to take a view that basically the government's paid out through the pandemic. We've had a benefit out of that, in the sense that people have had furlough payments, they've had abilities for the loans that have been given to them, and all sorts of things that the government did. Now it's payback time. So night and day, it follows, doesn't it? We knew that it was going to come. So there's no surprise here. It's just that I think that you've got to take a view and say to yourself, how do I balance this out, and how do I work that in my own personal finances to make sure. And our job at Property Matters is to obviously point out sometimes what is the obvious, but sometimes when you hear it from someone else, you actually kind of, the penny drops and you say, yeah, I think, we need to sort of do these things. And all I'd say is, you've got to do some housekeeping and make sure that you're looking at. I mean, I suggested last week, for example, go through your direct debits. You'd be quite shocked how many direct debits you're just coughing out, and you actually don't realize that you probably need to stop paying them. And you can do that. I actually did that exercise this week, and I was quite surprised. There was some bits that I was paying for. I kind of couldn't remember why I was paying for them, so just cancelled them. Because if they're that important, someone's going to phone me up and say, "Oh, you didn't pay for that." And if they're that not important, they're just not going to appear. So you just got to get a wiper and rub them out and say, "All right, well, let's see who shouts the loudest and who tells me that I should have been paying for that," and then I'll think about it again. But there are lots of things in there that you sort of kind of forget. And there might be £100 a month saving there. You never know, and so you've got to sort of balance that out.
Quite easily. Yeah, as for buyers, I mean, we, as you've said many a time, Joe, it's a long-term commitment. If you're buying a house, and you'll take the downs with the ups. Of course, there are usually many more ups than there are downs. And the fact of the matter is that money is still cheap. Mortgages are still cheap at the moment. Whatever the prices say, and so the per month cost is still lower than it would normally have been in the past. And the good news is that sellers are still keen to get on the marketplace. There's plenty of property coming up now, and also there's plenty of people looking to buy. So it's still a great time to sell your property, still a great time to buy property. And of course, you're getting on that ladder, as you've said so many times, Joe. So, but there is no doubt about it, is there, that mortgages and money is going to become more expensive and rates are going to go up. So you just need to make sure that you can afford to weather that storm.
Yeah, I mean that all of those things are going to happen, and the best laid plan of men and mice is probably where we got to sort of try and do this, and that is that take stock now, look at what can be done, what can be locked in, what rates can be locked in, for example. So whilst lenders are sort of pushing the rates up, they are also offering some good fixed rates, and you might be able to smile in 3 to 4 years time and find that you've actually done a good thing by fixing a rate, because the rates maybe go higher than the fixed rates. So all of these things are housekeeping that you just kind of got to do right now. And nothing stops you doing that. If you don't, then the only person to blame for it is yourself. You can't turn around and say somebody didn't say so. I just think that these are just basic things that we're going to do, and they are going to go up. And whilst rates are still cheap, money is still cheap to borrow. What you have to bear in mind is that other things are going up. Your shopping bills are going up, your petrol's going up, your all sorts of other your utilities are going up, and that's probably the biggest scare, really, in my mind, is that you don't realize that all of a sudden, and then everybody, all the little people also follow. Your mobile phone will probably go up, and before you know it, your council tax are going to go up, and it's all one way going up from that. But the good thing is you all own a property that has increased in value for over 20% over the last 2 years. So you can't say that you didn't get something in return. So there is a value that has been increased, and you just got to accept that some housekeeping has to be done now.
Let's move on to our second story, Joe. Property industry is anxious that the government could increase the stamp duty surcharge on investors from 3 to 4% in the upcoming spring statement. This was planned to be part of the autumn budget, apparently, on the 27th of October last year, but was scrapped at the last minute by the Chancellor. And indeed, documents from the Office of Budget Responsibility released after the budget accidentally left a line in saying that stamp duty surcharge has been raised to 4% in this budget. Raising the surcharge would, of course, bring up the level to 4%, which is the additional dwelling supplement charged by the Scotland's Land and Buildings Transaction Tax. So it's already 4% in Scotland, their version of stamp duty. And it's going to look like it's going to go from 3 to 4%. Needless to say, the whole industry is asking for him to scrap it altogether. So, but if you're looking in the northwest, for example, on the tax bill, on the average £125,000 buy-to-let property, it would be up by a third to £5,010, which is next to £1,252. So these figures are quite substantial. So the question is, should he increase it or should he abolish it, as people are trying to advise the Chancellor to do, according to this week's Property Industry Eye?
So let's get this straight. It's free money. It's never, ever going to be abolished. I mean, I can't think of the time in the last 40 years when we haven't asked for stamp duty to be abolished. And we can cry and scream and kick and whatever. He's never going to do it. It's money that comes to him, come what may. Why does it come to him? Because people love to own their own home. It's the ultimate dream that everybody has, whether it's a little studio apartment or a country mansion. Ultimately, people want to own their own home. And that's the price you're going to pay to own your own home. The increase suggested is an increase for investors, for people who have got buy-to-let properties, and they're saying that the second home that they buy, instead of having a 3%, it's going to be potentially a 4%. Again, it's a self-driving thing. Why? Because what else do people invest in? There is no other vehicle to sort of have a safer investment in, so people will continue to buy to let, and they will pay it. I use the analogy of the congestion charge in London. They started with £10 and thought people will never go into London after £10, and then they went to 12, and now they're up to 15. It doesn't stop people wanting to drive their car into London, and it's the same principle here. We can kick and scream and ask for this. It's not going to happen. So the best thing to do is get used to it. It is going to be a charge. It's going to go up. I don't think it's going to abolish it. It's money that he needs to bring in, the Chancellor. And as far as I'm concerned, we need to just allow for that budget and put energy into, developing and doing the things that you want to do, rather than the things that you can't control. You cannot, and we cannot control what any Chancellor, let alone Rishi Sunak, can do with the stamp duty. He's going to charge, he's going to put that up, whether it's in line with Scotland or Newcastle or Birmingham. It's just going to happen. You just got to accept the fact that he's going to make that charge. So in my opinion, we're wasting time and energy asking him to actually abolish it, because I cannot think of any time in my history when he's abolished it. The only good thing he ever did probably was to reduce the stamp duty period, or increase the stamp duty period during the pandemic, which again was done to drive the property market. So they control that. You and I just don't have a say. We're just like little puppies. We just follow along and say, okay, that's a good idea. Let's go out there and do it. And then we fall into the trap of saying, oh, you should abolish it. Well, actually, he's not going to do it. So as far as I'm concerned, get used to it. It's going to happen.
Well, the government has to plug the financial holes left by COVID, of course, and they're going to have to pay for the supplements to help people with their rising energy costs, and they're going to tax the landlords more, especially when you consider that the Housing Secretary, Michael Gove, said last week that landlords are of significant means. So he clearly thinks that they're all minted. And obviously, if they're invested in property, there are many people that would agree with him, I'm sure. The stamp duty surcharge was given to residential buyers back in 2016, so it's been around a while already. It's been commonly blamed for squeezing out rental stock in the UK, causing some landlords to sell up and others to dip into Airbnb, where the tax regulations were slightly lighter. But of course, that's all changing now as well. And the National Residential Landlords Association, you'd expect them to say this, I guess, increasing stamp duty will lead to a sharp fall in the number of homes to rent as more and more landlords get out of the marketplace. But it's an interesting one, as you rightly say, whether I think they've got so many things to pay for, they're not going to reduce the tax burden on us, are they, anytime soon?
No, I can't see it. And I think it's just something we have to accept, that it's going to be. Yes, it's good to have some lobbyists out there who are sort of making all these noises about it should be abolished, or it shouldn't be increased, and it shouldn't be doing this, and it shouldn't be doing that. I guess it's a job for somebody to do. But in essence, if you were the Chancellor and you had to balance the books and there was some money coming in for nothing, there's no way you're going to turn around and say, well, I actually feel sorry for you. I'm actually going to abolish that. It's just not real. It's not going to happen. So that's where I'm at with that.
Indeed. Story number 3 this week, planning permission hits a record high last year. It's interesting. Fresh analysis of the latest official planning statistics by the company Savills shows that a record number of planning permissions and home improvements and extensions were granted in the year to September 2021, as homeowners and home movers look to create more living space. I had a total, Joe, in just 6 months, this is 136,000 planning consents were granted in England in the 6 months to September 2021, the strongest 2 quarters for home improvement and extension since the middle of 2014. It brought the number of permissions granted to 247,500 for the year to September 2021. So almost 250,000 planning permissions granted in the year to September, 19% above what it was pre-pandemic, and an increase of more than a third on the preceding 12 months. So it looks like not just people moving, but people thinking, well, there's so much cost associated with moving now, maybe I'll just extend.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's good to hear that so much planning permission has been granted.
Mm.
Often it's a huge bugbear in most people's average life. They can spend months, years, and if not several years, and appeals trying to get some basic extension done on their property. It's a needs must situation. Families when they're growing want the space. Throughout the pandemic, obviously that was a big driver because some people moved and some people stayed where they were and decided to extend. And that's these figures are as a result of all those extensions, because people realized that they needed to work from home, they needed to create the extra office space as such, or just generally there was everybody at home and needed a bit more space. Yeah, and you're absolutely right in suggesting that it is a counter cost effective way, and that is that you could turn around and say, well, I can move, and then there's selling costs, legal costs, agency costs, etc., etc. Or you can actually sum it up and say, well, actually, it might be just as well for me to use the money that I'm going to utilize, and don't forget the stamp duty, because we can't forget the stamp duty on that, because when you're buying, he's going to knock on the door and have his fair share. So all of a sudden, there could be an average moving cost could be around £30,000. And for £30,000 to £40,000, you could actually have a fairly decent extension done on your property that will provide. So it does, provide a challenge for people to do. The problem with all of these things is are they the right things to do? And sometimes you extend beyond what is going to actually return. But if you're going to be there for another 5 years, then of course it will come back in line with the market, and you'll probably see that your return on investment will be well rewarded, because if you've extended and spent £30,000 to £50,000 on an extension, and the house price goes up by that, perhaps in 5 years' time, then you know that it was a good move to do. But if you do that and then you think that you're going to actually get an extension now, and then turn around and say, well, I'm going to get the return of that extension next year when I sell it, then I think you just got to get real with that, and I don't think that would actually happen. So I think people have been extending, of course. All of those costs, and then builders are just as cute on that now. They come and tell you that building materials have gone up. Labor supply has limited, so because everybody went back home, from all our Eastern Bloc builders who went back home prior to the pandemic, and now it's a couple of £100 a day for a basic labourer. So all of those things have gone sky high, and subsequently they become a reason for people to say, well, I can make a bit more money on this. So look, everyone is in it for the gain. There's no one's going to turn around and say it's a fair cop. It is what it is, and but people have been extending. People are doing the extension, and they are creating the extra space. And it's very important to see that councils have actually got their finger out and got some planning permissions out in a decent time.
Well, as you can see there, first comment immediately under this story is good luck to them finding a builder, which of course we have talked about in the past. They are like hen's teeth at the moment because they've been so busy, haven't they? So that is very true. But looking at what they're saying here with the figures, it seems that quite a lot of the people that actually moved then embarked on extension work or change of layouts, etc., which required the planning permission, which is interesting in a way, because you'd think that if I was moving to a new house, I'd want to move to something, yes, all right, I might want to decorate, but by the same token, I'd want to move to something that was right for me, because that's why I'm moving, surely. Why would I want to move and then have to change the house into what I wanted it to be before I bought it? I suppose you could say, well, this is the great time to do it because, you're moving in to a property that you want to decorate and so on, so you might as well make the mess first and then get it all the way you want. But for me, I'd want to move to somewhere where it was right, because I'm moving from somewhere that wasn't, surely.
That's a good point, Paul, and I'm glad you bring that up. And I'll deal with that in the two stages. First of all, everyone buys a property that suits them, and some people actually buy it and are happy with what they're buying because that's exactly what they want to do. Some people buy a property and go, I want to buy this property. It is something what I want to do, but it also offers me the scope to do the things I've always wished I would like to do, and extend and have the extra room and so forth. And so when you are buying a brand new built home, you're buying today, in today's world, you're buying a fully fledged, fully expanded, every inch, centimeter, millimeter taken up, and the chance of you actually extending that is probably lesser than being struck by lightning. So, that's what you're going to do. The design of new homes is built on the basis that basically there's not much you can do to it. You might put a conservatory and then you shrink the garden. You might put a loft conversion, but most new homes are now coming with a room in the loft. Storage becomes an issue. And so the only properties, that can be looked at and extended are your traditional 1930s, 50s, 60s types of properties where they still left a half decent garden, maybe a driveway to maybe do a wraparound, and maybe a detached house. And those are the ones that people go in there and say, I want to move to that. They've lived through the new ones, the modern ones. So our millennials love a box because they can't be bothered to do anything. So that's why they buy a modern sort of four walls and a ceiling, not even a roof. And basically it's done in the usual builders decorating and the takeaways across the road. So they don't want to do anything. They're not your candidates for the new homes. The new homes are family homes where people turn around and say, well, actually, I want to have a bigger garden. I want to have a driveway. I want to be able to park 2 or 3 cars. The kids are growing up, So that's where the extension world comes into, and that will never go away. But as those older properties begin to diminish, the new properties will always be maximum built, and then you will have a cycle. So taking a step back about 30 plus years, the average time in a moving of a home is anything between 3 and 5 years. Every 3 to 5 years, people used to move because they could go. So you start with a studio, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, terraced, end of terraced, semi-detached and detached. That was the step factor that went on. And so they went to grow. But now it was a case of I'd buy a brand new property. It serves my purpose. The next generation not interested in a garden. They're not worried about where their car's going to be. All of those things are changed. But it will have a recycle where people will come back and say, actually, I do need, and that's why the pandemic moved a lot of people out of the cities, because it gave them a space. The race for space happened. People wanted bigger gardens. They wanted to have a conservatory. They could do a loft conversion. They could probably put a double garage at the back of the gardens. All of those things that happened. And that's why the planning permissions were put in, for people to sort of say, okay, you know what, I'm not going to go away anywhere. I'm going to stay here. I'm going to extend my property. But like our viewers has said, good luck with the builders. The builders are flat out, and are obviously milking the opportunity and charging at the maximum rate at this moment in time.
What's interesting is the highest increases in consents were actually in the northeast and Yorkshire and Humberside and around there. 47% increase in the case of the northeast, 45% in Yorkshire and Humber. And the suggestion is that a lot of people have been looking for investments up in the north, because obviously the prices represent really good value, but also it gives them a little bit of extra cash to then do what they want to the property as well. And even in London, where permission is typically harder to receive because of the nature of London, obviously, and its history, consents were still up a third even in London. But it's interesting that there's an investment angle to this.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing with that being in the north or the northeast or Humber is always about value against money, time and money, and there they had the opportunities, and the market was such you get a lot more house for the money. And then the next thing was communication. We've covered this many a time. Communication is the answer to the problem. I mean, it's important to understand that where there's a network or rail network or a good internet connection, all of those things began to be the factors that allowed for people to move. And of course, if they're then working from home, they needed to extend. And the margins were there because they bought a property, perhaps, especially if they moved from a city, perhaps London or outer skirts of London, up to the north somewhere. They had more capital in their hand to be able to invest and create the home of their dreams by adding an extension to it. So I think that was just a natural way, and it will continue. It will never change. There'll always be a demand for people who want to actually put their. I mean, if I could give you a penny for every person that asks me, can I buy a doer-upper? I'd be a very rich man, but I'm not, because that's the wish that everybody has. I'd like to buy a property that I could do up. So this extension business is actually it's just the norm. It's what people want. We think that it's a headache. You might think that I'd like to move into a property that is already done, but a good percentage of people want to put their own mark on their home, and that's the difference. If they're buying a home and they're buying a property to live in, they want to make it a home that they enjoy and they want to see it the way they want to see it. If it's a house and it's just an investment, they don't really care. What they look to do is extend it to provide the maximum number of rooms so they can actually get the maximum return from their investment. So they can rent it out to maybe 5 as opposed to 4 people, and have an extra room to rent out. Whereas it's a home, it's really about making their own mark and making it comfortable to live in.
Let's move off to Hertfordshire now, Joe, where Auction Property has an interesting little property called Prior's Gate in Priory Street in Ware. 170,000 is the opening bid for this. This is an interesting property because it's currently used as an office, isn't it, Joe? There we are.
This is an office building, and under the permitted development rights, there is an opportunity for somebody to apply to the planning permission for conversion into a residential, though it makes a very good office as it is, or you can have a combined office and living accommodation there. It's in the heart of the town, of the high street. A great opportunity, and look at the price, guide of £170,000. You're not even in Hertfordshire, you're not buying a garden shed for that kind of money. So, you've got to look at the opportunity, the window of planning, the scope that you could do. It's a great doer-upper. It's a great opportunity for those people that want to put a mark on it. It's a great opportunity for those that want to have an investment, good return and good access communication with M25. And of course, I'm happy to start the bids at £170,000.
It's currently used as an office. Looks like it's got some age to it, Joe. You can see there's beams in there and pillars and things, and obviously some kind of fireplace arrangement in the centre of the office area there. So it's got some age. Is it listed at all?
It's a character building. I don't believe it's actually listed, but I would have to go to recheck that. So don't hold me to that. But yes, it offers character in terms of the beams and the structure that it has. And I think that it's something that an investor, I've had a lot of interest in it, a lot of investment interest actually, where people are looking to turn it into a residential and then to rent it out on a long-term basis. So that's available at our auction on the 29th of this month.
Fantastic. More details, of course, from auctionproperty.co.uk. On the website there, you'll find a link through to that particular property. Well, Joe, we're out of time. We've had at least 40-odd minutes this morning. Good old chat this morning, as always. So thank you very much indeed for all your wisdom, as always. And thank you for watching Property Matters with us this week. We'll see you again, of course, next week at the same time.